What would people say about this life I choose? What would people say if I asked them to?
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to People Say, a podcast where I unpack the challenges of launching a career in a creative field. Today's episode features Ed Harcourt. With 9 studio records and a Mercury Music Prize nomination under his belt, Ed has composed film scores, toured with the likes of REM, Wilco, and Snow Patrol, and performed with everyone from Patti Smith to Nick Cave. His musical resume is littered with co-writing credits that include the likes of Paloma Faith, James Bay, Lisa Marie Presley, and Marianne Faithfull, just to name a few. He's also played piano for Lana Del Rey and produced Sophie Ellis-Bextor, amongst many other artists. I am honored and humbled to welcome the incredible Ed Harcourt to the podcast.
Hello, Ben, and thank you for having me.
Oh, man, it is an honor and a pleasure. You were one of the guests I thought would be a great fit, and I'm super stoked that you had some time for me.
It's my absolute pleasure, and during this harrowing and terrible crisis that we're all in together, I'm happy to completely expunge my ridiculous perspective on life.
Oh, fantastic. Are you staying sane over there?
It's interesting. That is a very loaded question, a good question, and an obvious question, because there are moments where you have this manic energy and you're running around and you're being creative and it's great, and then there's other moments where you just feel like, what's the point? You just have this lethargy, you just have this total, and you think, the sort of running with the black dog a little bit, and I think everyone's going through it, and most people, it's really tough for a lot of people, and so I think if you have something that you love doing that's creative, I think that's very important. I think it's also, don't lose sight of that. Just keep that in the back of your head if you're feeling a bit down. Just to be able to go and do something that's I don't know, anything really. Write something down, paint a picture, write a song. Just anything like that for me it's such a therapeutic thing.
I'd love to take it back to your origin story, like where you grew up. As far as I understand, you grew up in Wimbledon. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I was born in Wimbledon. My mum was staying with some friends, but we lived in Belgium at the time.
Oh, wow.
My dad was in the army, so I'm an army brat, and we moved house every 2-3 years. So I had quite an itinerant childhood, and I grew up in Germany and Holland and Sweden and Belgium, and then intermittently in England as well. At one point, I think, in the early 90s, I went to boarding school, and my parents lived in the British Embassy in Stockholm. So
wow.
That was quite mad, and it was quite fun. In the winter holidays, we'd go up in a Hercules army aeroplane, which kind of, when you get in, you sort of strap yourself in, and it kind of goes like that. And we'd fly up to Lapland with, the Indian army family and the Canadian army family, and we'd all kind of be in the same hotel and kind of go skiing for a week. That was kind of paid for by the army,
Well, thank you, English Army, for that. Do you look back on your childhood then, all the traveling around, you enjoyed it, you loved it? Is that what I'm getting?
I think so. I think you don't have as much self-awareness as you have when you're an adult, and I think you're just kind of going with the flow, really. And I think what it really taught me, moving from place to place, was how to make friends quickly and how to adapt to the situation that you're in, and be gregarious and be social, the oil in the social machine, if you know what I mean. And that was kind of my thing. When I went to school, it was my way of sort of surviving, was kind of make friends with everyone. But as you're trying to do that, you end up pissing people off anyway. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. But I think I don't want to kind of be sort of self-important in saying this, but I'm talking about this to a friend the other day, and we both agreed that we're actually kind of beneath the sort of outgoing veneer. We're actually quite shy, and I think a lot of the time people who are shy or just happy being on their own, they kind of build this sort of slight kind of different, this wall of sort of constantly showing off and being ridiculous.
What an interesting dichotomy. I've never perceived you to be a shy
That's
person.
the thing. I don't think anyone would. They're always kind of like, what? No, I bet you never get nervous, when you go on stage. And I'm like, no, I get unbelievably nervous. In fact, back in the day, 20 years ago, before I went on stage, I used to drink, as much booze as I could get my hands on before I went on stage because I was just really nervous.
That wouldn't mess up your performance at all?
Yeah, and I had a few performances that were just unbelievably terrible and very regrettable and shameful and I really learned my lesson on that one. I did a show once where I think half the audience walked out, but I did a formal apology online, but then half of the people complained and wanted their money back, but the other half said it was one of the best gigs they'd ever seen. Again, the dichotomy is real, man.
Such a strange thing.
I just would not do that now. I'm very, very professional now.
Very professional. That's great to hear. Did you grow up in a musical household? Did your parents play instruments?
No, so I'm the only one I've got two older brothers, and I'm the only one who's musical in my family. No one plays any. My middle brother played a bit of guitar, but plays banjo a little bit. But the musical side is on my mother's side. Both my grandparents were very. My grandmother was a classically trained pianist, and my grandfather, who I never met, who died in the 60s, he was from Cornwall. He was Cornish, and he could apparently play anything that he heard by ear. So he could hear anything and immediately play it. So there was a bit of I think that's where it comes from. And then my great aunt was this sounds so terribly English, but she was a famous harpsichord player called Violet Gordon Woodhouse. That's probably like the most English thing you've ever heard in your life. But she was called Violet Gordon Woodhouse, and there's a book written about her, and she was quite literally a player. I mean, she was quite out there. She lived with three men, so she was a sort of shared, but she kind of had these three men under her thumb who all were devoted to her, and they lived in this house, and they were part of this bohemian society in the 20s. And she used to play for kings and queens and but she was the first person in the world to record the harpsichord.
Wow, so, that's pretty crazy.
Which was quite mad, yeah. So that's where I think on my mum's side a lot of that. But then on my dad's side, they're all kind of writers and also quite bohemian as well. Quite kind of my grandfather on my dad's side spoke 8 languages and was also a diplomat and was a writer. And he was also a recording engineer and a music critic. And I only found out recently that my grandfather went around Eastern Europe with Bela Bartok, the composer, and helped do field recordings of all the Eastern European and Slavic music that eventually became Bartok's Slavic dances, which are like really famous classical pieces. So I only found that out. So that's there's an interesting sort of mishmash of different things going on, I guess.
Well, so there's a lot of artists in your family, at least if they're not musicians or your parents were, and it sounds like your whole family was creative. It's in the blood.
Creative, and a lot of, suicides and alcoholics and, and a lot of very flawed people as well.
Well, so do you think there was a moment where you were first exposed to music? Did your parents foster you must have had an obvious talent as a kid? My dad wasn't into modern music at all. In fact, he told me he only bought like a Kinks single in the 60s to impress a girl. Which one?
About it. Sunny Afternoon.
Good one.
But he listened to like Ravi Shankar. And also had Johnny Cash records and old folk records and records from Africa. And so that was in his final collection. And my mum had all the Beatles records and Johnny Cash. But it was my 2 older brothers who really got me into music. So the first record I ever owned was Best of Queen. I still love Queen. I don't care. I'm not having anyone say a bad word about Queen. And
do people not like Queen? I feel like they're pretty widely loved.
I don't know. Some people I meet, they end up slagging Queen off, and I'm like, no, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to slag off Queen. They're the best. And then I had the Best of the Eagles. I was part of a tape club, so I would get sent records. But sometimes I would get a free record, every month, and it would be, horrible, like Rick Astley or something, or just a really bad 80s record. And no offense to Rick Astley now. Yeah, he's a great singer. But anyway, at the time, it wasn't my thing. But then... but around the age of 10 or 11, I really got into Led Zeppelin, majorly, a Led Zeppelin nut. That's all I listened to. And then, the kind of, through my teens, listened to everything, really. A lot of, punk rock and hip-hop. And then, because I was a piano player, that didn't really feature in a lot of that music. But then I discovered sort of the classics, like Randy Newman and Harry Nilsson and Tom Waits and Velvet Underground and just lots of different Lou Reed, David Bowie, and that was it, really. That sort of set me on on the path.
So when you were playing music as a kid, do you feel like your parents really emboldened you to play? Like they encourage your creativity? Or it sounds like maybe your mom was super artistic, seemed more on the pop side of things, whereas your dad seemed maybe anti those things.
No, he was never anti. He was very much... My mother was actually very vital in me starting to learn the piano when I was 9. And I had my first lesson, and I was immediately hooked. It was just... I suddenly found the thing that I really loved doing. And I wasn't very good at sports. I was terrible at maths, quite good at English. That was about it. It was more like if I didn't have an interest in it, I wasn't really gonna, work hard. A terrible thing to say, but I had to be interested in it and if I was, I'd excel at it.
That makes sense.
But I was bottom of maths, just terrible. Almost sort of dyslexic with numbers and things like that. Fell in love with literature and English prose and the language and stories and that combined with music, obviously it set the path, for becoming a songwriter, I think.
Well, it's interesting because you said your dad was in the military, and when I think of the military and being an artist are like polar opposite perspectives,
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because actually my dad, since he's retired, he's an artist now.
Really?
So, yeah, he's a painter, and he sells his paintings in exhibition. And he does watercolors, really amazing. I've got one in here actually. It's of a spider crab. I bet you didn't think I was going to say that, but it actually is of a spider crab.
Oh, wicked, dude!
Yeah,
love it.
Yeah, so he does loads, and he does like salmon and trout, and he's really into fishing and all that kind of stuff. And
so he loves fish.
Yeah, he goes off and he goes fishing, goes to Scotland, and he's very active. He's quite an interesting fellow. He's again quite a dichotomy, and he loves poetry and he's quite sensitive, but he's also been in wars and been in terrible situations, and he's had heart attacks and so many. His back was broken from riding on horses and things like that. So he's got tinnitus from not wearing ear defenders when he was a helicopter pilot for the army in the 60s, in those little bubble helicopters, that you would see when you watch MASH or whatever. And, so he's got a lot of kind of health problems, but he just keeps going. It's incredible.
Well, it sounds like...
My mother will be like, Charlie, you've got to rest. And my dad would be like, no, I'm going out. I'm going to climb a mountain, woman. So, yeah. He's got the drive, you got to, having that drive is important, I think, just the hunger,
Well, the hunger is definitely, you can't survive in certain
I know
music.
You've got the hunger for sure.
Trying to, man. Do you remember the first song you ever wrote as a kid? Was this when you were a teenager, or is this later you developed an interest in songwriting?
That is a really difficult question, because the first song that I ever wrote that I can remember, I was in a band called Snug that we formed at school, and it was kind of, we ended up signing to Warner Brothers when we were like 16, 17. And
wow, I want to unpack that a bit more.
Three singles, and then we were really into Weezer and Green Day and stuff like that. We ended up supporting Green Day.
Wow.
In London, yeah, it was insane. And we were really, really young. I was the guy, because I played bass and I kind of sang. Started out doing harmonies, not really singing, but then I ended up writing, and then ended up writing half of the songs later on. And then we sort of split up when I was like 18, 19. But I wrote a song called Losing My Hair, which was about a guy losing his hair just from stress. He's just really stressed out, and that was the song. But it was very kind of beatly. But my voice sounds so weird. It sounds really young and like nasally, completely different to how I sound now. It's bizarre.
That's such a, I find that to be so head scratching, pardon the pun.
No, it's just weird. It's just a weird song.
Well, it's very mature. It's very mature songwriting, because when you hear most people's, Billy Joel's first song or Elton John's first song, they're all like really cheesy love songs written by someone who clearly has never been in love. When I see young writers in their first works, so it seems rather precocious to write a song about a guy who's stressed out from his wife and losing his hair. How did you?
Yeah, how does it go? It goes like, she hates me, I hate you, you hate her. No, she hates me, you hate her, I hate you, couldn't be better. and then losing my hair. And then there was another one as well called Anemone, which was about, those little things in the ocean, and it was a sort of a love song about this weird little, vegetable thing in the ocean that fell in love with a human. Quite odd.
Well, it sounds like you find the interesting in the mundane in your songwriting.
I think that's our job, really. I think that's, I was been working with this great singer called Tom Bright. I was producing his record, and I'm going to do his second record. We literally do it in 2-3 days. He comes in, we just record it. And his songs are like these little vignettes, and because he's singing about things that could be mundane, but they're like short stories in the way of like Chekhov or Raymond Carver. And they're like, what they do is they kind of take the sort of kitchen sink drama and things that are quite sort of everyday normal life, and then he puts a twist on them and turns them into these really interesting little stories. And I think that's our job, isn't it? That's our job, is to kind of look for those sparkling little diamonds that are kind of at the bottom of the lake, and try and kind of dig them up.
This guy's a writer. Look at that. Love that.
You know what I mean, though? Like
I do.
It's like, and also, when I'm writing with, when I'm also being that wall that other writers can bounce off, that is my job, to be the miner, to kind of get the pickaxe and sort of, kind of dig into the bottom of the cave and find the sort of, the gold. And, you help each other and you learn from each other, and that helps create something, that's timeless. Hopefully.
Completely agree. I'd love to talk a bit about Snug and getting signed. I noticed that a lot of non-musical professionals, the parents, the random people watching, when they hear, oh, this guy's gotten signed, this band's gotten signed, their immediate thought is they've made it. When in reality, it's really just the beginning of your journey, and it doesn't really necessarily mean anything. It could be the opposite of making it. I'd love to, what was going through your mind when you got signed? It must have been super exciting. You're 16 years old.
You just literally just like, what? Is this really happening? And you're like, wow, this is so amazing, it's so exciting, and everyone's interested in this, and and we're being taken out in limousines and going to fancy dinners and being wined and dined by, the man in the industry. And, and it's interesting. You would never think at the start of your career, you're not going to obviously think retrospectively, you're just going to live in the moment, but if I could talk to myself 25 years ago, I would be like, listen, buddy, it's going to be a serious roller coaster. There are going to be ups and downs, peaks and troughs. One day you're going to be flush with a little bit of money. The other day you're going to be totally screwed and destitute, and thinking of just having to get a different job, and I've had those moments, and I don't know, it's I do sometimes wake up in the morning and I'm kind of like, really, do I have to go and kind of get another credit card in order to survive, but then suddenly something comes along and it's your knight in shining armor, and it saves you. I think in this day and age it's going to be, hi, this is this is McDonald's and we'd like to use your song for and you're like, 20 years ago, I would be like, no way. Now, we can't really, it's horrible. It's gross, the idea of a song being used on a commercial, but I don't think we have a choice anymore, because the bottom really has fallen out of the actual recording industry. And that's a different subject altogether, because I'm going off on a tangent. But, streaming, as we all know, is an absolute joke when it comes to paying royalties to the artists who have, and I'm not saying this lightly, who have actually kind of really worked hard to create their music. And,
no doubt.
And you're literally paid back in just kind of nickels and dimes,
Totally. So you get signed and you're super pumped, but then in short order you get dropped. I mean, that must have been just
so what happened was we got signed. We did this is back in the day when silly money was being spent on things like music videos, and we were so young, and labels were just signing so many bands. There was a label called V2 around the same time as us who signed about 60 bands, and I think about 50 of them got dropped within a year. And it was like this big explosion of indie bands in the late 90s. And it was just before, I guess, Napster started in around 2000, 1999, I think. And then we got signed, we did 3 singles. And then I think we were in the middle of making our debut album. And we were making it with a producer, and he was kind of a legendary producer, and he worked with Pink Floyd and people like that. And And I think it was in the middle of our record. While we were making our debut album, we got dropped.
Oh, wow.
So we were like, oh, God, what do we do now? And then we just we created our own label. So I called the label Howling Duck Records, and I drew a cartoon of a duck howling at the moon. And that was like the little label sort of emblem.
Yeah.
And then we released it ourselves and did a couple of gigs. And then we made another record. And then suddenly we had the proper sort of cliche of going to Japan and playing the Summer Sonic Festival with like Weezer and Green Day, Ben Folds 5, and like hung out with like at the drive-in, and you know, it was just mad. And we had like people following us everywhere. It was really crazy. And then while we were in Tokyo, I got a fax pushed under my door, and it was my record contract with EMI as a solo artist. Between that time of going to Japan and being dropped, I went back to Sussex and lived with my grandmother, who was very old and frail, and had a carer who would come in. But I said to my parents, that can I live with my grandmother because there's a baby grand piano there. And I worked as a chef, and basically...
Wow. Out of financial need or out of desire?
I had no money, and my parents, I mean, they lived in a cottage, but my grandmother lived in this rambling old mad farmhouse with like lots of rooms and huge, it was a big house on a farm. And I just kind of said, look, I'll go there and I'll kind of keep an eye on her when the carers aren't there. She had a bit of a drinking problem, so I kind of had to also kind of make sure she didn't, drink a bottle of white wine at like 11 in the morning. So I kind of was a bit of a sort of a guardian or a chaperone, or I don't know. She was suffering from mild dementia at that point. I was there, and I would go and work as a chef every other day and then come back, and I had a kind of quite an odd lifestyle. I would come back at 1 a.m, having done like, sometimes an 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. shift, come back, like make a sandwich, open a bottle of red wine and just go to the music room, and I had a drum kit and Tascam 4-track cassette recorder, and basically just write. Sometimes 3 songs a night.
So it sounds like you really needed to work insanely hard just to have any shot at all. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, basically, yeah. And I just did that for I didn't have any friends. I had a girlfriend in London who was a lot older than me, an American actually. And we ended up going out for like 5 years. But, they basically just kind of kept myself to myself and was quite isolated. And the house was like creaky, and you heard things at night. And I thought I heard ghosts, and so all my songs were about like things in the floorboards and ghosts. And at that time, I was listening to a lot of, quite a lot of Americana and American music actually, stuff like Sparkle Horse and the Eels, and I was really into Tom Waits. So I was kind of listening to all of that and really indulging and diving into that kind of music, and then being influenced by it and trying to recreate it myself, but from a sort of pastoral English point of view.
Did you feel like a pressure at this point at all to make it?
No pressure at all. There was no pressure. I was only writing for myself. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. In fact, my father did the kind of classic, take me for a walk around the garden, life talk, and kind of say, you can't be a chef, a sous chef your whole life. What are you going to do with yourself? What are you going to do? And I was like, well, I don't know yet. Just give me some time. I think I might be a songwriter, actually. I might be a singer or a songwriter, So I kind of... And then it just suddenly, I had a demo tape, and it just fell into the hands of... I sent it off to a few managers, and then I went with this manager, and suddenly within like 6 months, I signed to EMI.
When you told this to your dad, you want to be a songwriter, was he supportive?
No.
Was that tough?
Yeah, it's very tough, actually. And actually... One of the first gigs I ever did, I was actually heckled by my own father.
No way.
Yeah, he said something like, get a move on, or something like that. I was like, oh, Dad, thanks a lot, Jesus. But he did that, and then he came to see a gig that I played, Shepherd's Bush Empire, I headlined there, just around, maybe after the Mercury Music Prize, and that was... I think that's pretty much the last show he came to see, and that was like 19 years ago.
Is that because of he disapproves of this artist lifestyle, or? It's
not that he disapproves. I think he is very proud of me. I actually think it may be because he's got tinnitus. So it might be for health reasons. I don't, I've never really brought it up with him, and I'm not, I accept him for who he is, and I think he's accepted me for who I am. But, he is always going to be the patriarch who kind of says, how are you doing? Are you are you coping financially and things like that, And I think, he says it because he never had any money when he was growing up. So,
gotcha.
So he grew up in a very bohemian, quite upper middle class family, well read, but they just didn't have any money.
Do you think your mom had a similar perspective to your dad through all this, or they were a united front, or she had completely
No.
opposite?
She's very different. She's very supportive. My mum's been to about 200 of my gigs.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. She's really supportive, and every now and then she'll be like, I don't like that loud one, like that loud. Like when I did an album called Furnaces, and it's kind of pretty heavy in places and quite dark and quite apocalyptic and epic. I'm not sure if she's a big fan of that record. But then she'll surprise me because she'll say that her favourite song is a song that I wrote, a B-side called Hearing Monsters, which is the name of my debut full-length album. And she'll be like, I love that song. And I'm like, really? That's about a boy who falls down a well and finds a portal to hell. And she's like, yeah. She's like, yeah, I love that song. I'm like, I thought you didn't like the dark stuff, mama.
So that's very nice, though, that your mom supported you. Do you think that actually helped you work a lot harder or feel less pressure? Because you're like, no, my mom has supported me through this.
It's really funny you say that, because it's weird, because when I think, with parents, you let's say, for instance, you want to impress your father, or you want to be accepted by him in what you do. But then your mother's like really accepting and really proud of you, and you're kind of a bit like blasé about it. And you're a bit like, oh, mum, don't embarrass me. Hey, thanks a lot. You don't have to be so gushy. It's cool. So it's kind of weird. It's like the way that they react to what you do, you have the opposite effect.
Do you think that when you were growing up, your friends and perhaps even your siblings, do you think they believed in what you were doing and supported it, or do you think there was some judgment happening?
No. I think people were just surprised. I played my first ever gig at my brother's birthday in an underground club in London, and everyone was like, "What?" My brother was just like, "Where the hell's this come from?" And I had all these songs, and I was really nervous, and I kind of play, and they were just really amazed, and they were really supportive, and I suddenly was kind of like, oh, actually, maybe I'm onto something.
That's amazing.
But yeah, people were, but as I said, I really, to be honest, made my really close friends when I moved to London. So in the year 2000 is when I have made all of my closest friends throughout that time of living in London.
Are they musicians?
Most of them are musicians, and yes, well, there's a few that aren't, but most of them are, yeah, for sure.
I wonder if that's at all because obviously musicians understand each other. We all live this strange life, so it's easy to identify with the bizarre hours and lifestyle and choices.
I think so, yeah. I think, but it's not just, I think it's also you meet like-minded people who are, how do you say, free-spirited, and I would say probably between about 2002 and 2010 was quite a kind of fun time in a sort of very, very kind of throwing caution to the wind type of way. So,
Well, it sounds like you were pretty undeterred by everybody around you pretty much the entire time. It sounds like you don't care what anybody thinks. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, it's interesting you said that. I used to have a real problem with what people thought of me, especially when I started releasing records as a solo artist, and if I read a bad review, it really kind of got under my skin. I was unprepared for it, really. I found it hard, and I was at some point, I think I sent a journalist who gave me a bad review. I sent him 100 question marks, which was quite weird. And I think it really confused him. I just wrote 100 question marks in an email to him, and then another time I wrote a letter to a journalist. I think she thought I was a bit mental because I basically said that it was her fate to be remembered by what she fails to understand. And then, which is a George Moore quote. And then I also said that she aimed low and she missed. And I told her that, if she wanted to, come to my gig, she wasn't welcome. And but she read it, and I think she laughed. And I think I might have even met her, and we laughed about it.
Well, that's good.
But I was actually probably a bit of an arsehole, to be honest. And just an uppity, arrogant, self-entitled twat. So, I hope that I've learned from the errors of my ways, but I think, it's, again, no one tells you how you're meant to sort of react to things like that. And especially when you feel very protective of your songs and your music.
For
but
sure.
Now I'm kind of at the point that I am now thank God, as you get older, you can just become completely insensitive.
Well, I hope, I'm sure I'll discover that in time.
Oh, no, you will. Don't worry. It just gets easier. You're like, because as well, like once you have kids, my kids are now like 9 and 11, and they just take the piss out of me all the time. They're like now getting to that point, they actually mock me, like openly mock me. And there's nothing I can do. I have to kind of just be a good sport and take it and be like, ha ha ha, that's very funny. You know, and if I get angry, I just come across as a complete idiot, a buffoon, a clown, you know?
So let's go back to you get signed from EMI and you're still in your band, Snug.
Yeah, so I was in them.
So your mates must have been were they pissed that you decided to leave the band?
Yeah, I think the guys were, I think the drummer Johnny went off. He was okay with it. But I think mainly, I think some of the guys were a little annoyed. A little just kind of like, oh, they were happy for me, but they were also a bit like, oh, you know, this is the end of our band and Ed's going off and he's signing a deal and, you know, but they're fine now and we're all friendly and we're, you know, it's all good. But there's no way I would do it again, to be honest.
She would have rejected the deal.
Rejected what, sorry?
You're saying you wouldn't do it again, meaning you would have rejected the solo offer? Is that what you mean?
Oh, God, no. I mean, there's no way. We'll get to this later, but I've got a new band that I'm in, like a rock and roll band. But there's no, I just, you know, it was part of my life that was in the very early stages of my musical career, you know, that was when we were all just still kind of finding our feet and developing. And I think it was, in a way, it was probably too much too soon, you know,
right.
But I definitely learned from it. And you know, one of the reasons I think why I snuck back to the Sussex, you know, hills with my tail between my legs was, you know, I was kind of, wow, I'd only been in the industry for 2 years and I was already sick of it, you know. And I was kind of able to just go back and pick myself up again and collect my thoughts and kind of start writing just for myself and for the enjoyment of it, I think. And, you know, that's why it's very easy if you sign a major deal or you sign to a label, you suddenly find yourself writing for the label and not for yourself. And that's when it gets tricky.
Mm. So is there a moment in any point here, whether you signed as a solo artist or maybe you made your first record, where you've kind of felt, okay, I've done it. Like I've made it in my mind. Was there a moment that you thought the stars have aligned? I'm a musician for life. I'm never going to look back. Or
I think so. Yeah, I think it was like, I just remember there was this moment when we played, I think it was 2001 or 2000. Maybe it was the summer of 2001, just when Heavy Monsters was coming out. And I did 4 nights at the Borderline in London and they were all sold out and it was really hot. And there were just all these people and they were just, I don't know what it was. I just remember thinking, okay, this is it. This is insane. This is amazing. I don't even know how I got here, but it's happening. And I just don't, you know, I'm not able to predict how things are going to work out. I mean, I was very, very lucky to be on EMI and on Heavenly Records because they stuck with me for 7 years. And it's kind of unheard of, really, with an artist such as myself who hasn't sold a huge amount of records. They just kept me on their books and I was able to kind of release, I did 4 full-length albums and then I did a sort of best of with them, which was a bit odd for me because when the best of came out I was only 30 years old, but you know, it was just basically the last 4 albums with a mini album and a new track. But I was extremely lucky to have that springboard, I think. But when I did leave EMI in 2007, then I was just a bit lost at sea and I wasn't sure what to do for about a year. Interesting.
And so is there a point in this solo journey that you start collaborating with others? When does that start?
Yeah, so that's also, that ties into leaving EMI. I kind of had loosely done a bit of co-writing. I wrote a song with the jazz artist Jamie Cullum for his record, and then that was all I'd done really. And then I ended up suddenly like kind of producing this singer called Mr. David Viner, kind of folky, brilliant artist, sort of bit Leonard Cohen, Nick Cave, and then that was my first thing I ever produced. And then I suddenly was kind of like, oh, you know, I quite enjoy this. And as soon as I left EMI, I was starting to work with people like Paloma Faith and different singers and artists, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. And as you know, you go into a session and sometimes it just doesn't click.
For sure.
And it can just, you know, be a total nightmare. But you do find those people that you work really well with. And so I did that, and I kind of put my own stuff on the back burner and started getting to co-writing about 13 years ago. But then I realized I had to keep writing for myself.
Do you have a preference of the two?
I think probably, I mean, obviously, I believe that probably writing for myself is the most important thing for me.
Interesting.
It is. And, but, you know, I love writing with other people as well. But, you know, I have to kind of I have to split them up, and I have to also slightly be compartmentalize and be very, I don't want to let too much of myself, of how I write sometimes, infiltrate other people's songs. You know, I kind of want them to be themselves. So you have to try and be a little bit neutral in a way. You know, I literally just be like I said before, be the wall that they can bounce off. You know,
when you were growing up, you have a musical hero. Who was your hero?
That is really, you mean like how old?
When I was growing up as a kid, like I saw John Mayer play, and I was like, who the fuck is this guy? I mean, blew my mind. And as an adult, it took me much later on to find Bob Dylan and Neil Young and the writers who really. I was probably like 10.
Oh wow!
You know, when your first record came out in 2000, you probably are a contemporary really of John Mayer. So I must have been 8 years old. You know,
you're making me feel so old. No. Well, I mean, I wasn't really into solo singers when I was 10. I was really into like rock bands.
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, my main thing was it was all just Led Zeppelin. I was obsessed with Led Zeppelin. So, but it was really when I was 18 that I discovered Tom Waits. And that was just that was like a Pandora's box just exploding in my face. And
is he your biggest hero to date as well, would you say?
It was just, it was just the early records that I started with.
Closing Time? Saturday Night?
Especially Closing Time. In fact, what happened was I heard Closing Time and there was something so, like the melancholia of it. There was kind of this sad nostalgia, and I don't know, it just completely spoke to me. And the production of it, the sort of the muted trumpet with the piano and the cover art and just, I don't know, there was just something so magical about it. And I met this trumpet player. Actually, it was at my brother's birthday when I did my first ever gig, and he was called Hadrian Gerard, and we ended up making 4 records together, the first 4 records. And he's on my mini album Maplewood, and he would come down to Sussex and we would kind of just play. And he doesn't play trumpet that much anymore, but he was incredible. He had this feel that was kind of like, I don't know, it was half Chet Baker, half kind of blue era Miles Davis. It was kind of in between that. And honestly, and so we would just, and because of Closing Time, especially Grapefruit Moon and the instrumental closing track, Closing Time, the instrumental, I really kind of, and I think Little Trip to Heaven as well, I just kind of was like, I think I could just play piano and Hadrian could play trumpet, and we'll just kind of start out like that and see what happens. And it's actually a partnership that I really miss, and I have been thinking about calling him and trying to get him up here to Oxfordshire to the Wolf Cabin, and I'm definitely thinking about getting him to come and do some, if he has picked up the trumpet in the last year, I don't know.
Well, maybe this will be the impetus, hopefully. I can only hope to inspire
maybe I'll send him the podcast, and then he can...
you should, man.
It can be like the scene in The Graduate at the end when he runs to the church, he's like banging on the window. I'm in a bridal dress, and
who do you think had the biggest impact on your career? It could be a musician, sure, but is there like a person in your life who you felt, surely it sounds like, like every artist, you've had tons of struggles. Is there someone who always was there, whether in person or in your mind, that just gave you the motivation to keep going when you're at your lowest? Yeah,
I mean, I think probably I would say one of my best friends, who's also godfather to my son, is Steve Gulick, who is the photographer, who's an unbelievable artist, photographer. He's also a musician. And we met 20 years ago in 2000, and he's done pretty much every album cover I've ever done. So we have collaborated over the last 2 decades together. We've traveled to Texas, we've traveled to Paris, we've been to Iceland together. We formed a band for one day once. And, we've drunkenly recorded some songs, but we're also we talk to each other probably every week. And he's one of those people that I sent, early on, I sent him a lot of my demos, 4-track demos. And he's just always been so encouraging and been like a mentor. He's about 10 years older than me. But he is I have a few mentors that kind of I look up to, that I'm become good friends with, and he's one of them. Ralph Steadman, the illustrator, is another one. Marianne Faithfull is another one. And, there's been plenty of people that I have worked with who I'm just flabbergasted and astounded when I work with them. And I just feel so lucky, to have the opportunity to actually, cook something up with them,
For sure. What do you think is your proudest piece of art? Whether it's your own solo stuff or a co-write that you've done or a production that you've made?
That's what? A tough question. I don't think I could put a push the button on that one. It's a difficult one because I've always had this theory, and I've said it as well, that, all your songs, are kind of like your children, and you can't really, if you focus too much on one song, you'll neglect the others, and those other songs will get jealous. So I kind of it's very hard for me to find a favorite piece of art, or I'm proud of all of it. I'm also embarrassed by some of it. But my main thing really is to create it and move on. I think that's really important, and don't rest in the laurels, and just kind of keep moving. Even when I've got a new album about to come out, I've got this new instrumental, my second instrumental record coming out in September. I'm already halfway through writing my next singing record, so I'm really focusing on that. And even though the album hasn't come out, it just feels like old hat already. The idea of having to tour, for 18 months, which obviously isn't going to happen right now, is, it always feels a bit odd to me. I don't think I can do it.
Do you find it challenging? And something I always ask my guests, you have a wife and you have kids. Is that a challenge as a musician? We live such a weird life. I imagine it must be, a huge complication to the journey.
I think so, but luckily, when we moved out here 3 years ago, the main thing is to have your own space. Everyone's got to have some kind of place they can go to and just lose themselves. I do manage to kind of juggle it quite well by being a night owl. I'm basically, I don't have insomnia, but I go to bed a lot later than everyone else. So I'm able to juggle that I'm kind of like, Gita and I will maybe watch a film. Once the kids are in bed, we'll have a glass of wine and watch a film, and then she usually falls asleep about halfway through the film. So.
Right. Well, and it must help that because Gita is also a musician. So
well, Gita is also making music all the time and is unbelievably prolific and a brilliant songwriter in her own right. So she has her band, Cruel Hearts Club, and she's so she's in that. They're a brilliant rock band, doing really well. They actually supported Iggy Pop last year.
Oh, amazing! Which
was insane. We went to Budapest to see them play with Iggy Pop, and they played with Sting as well. And then, so she's doing her thing. So yeah, we are juggling actually, but the kids are a little bit older, so it is easier. The kids are really cool. They're quite kind of self-sufficient.
Do you think they take after their parents in music?
They're already. Franklin is learning the drums, and he's the boy's got rhythm, thank God. and Roxy, my daughter, who is 11, has just passed her grade 3 on piano. And the main thing that we realised was that just don't, if you've got kids, don't force them. Don't aggressively push them into learning an instrument. Just kind of let them discover it naturally, I think. What my mum did with me, she just said, I think you should maybe learn the piano. And I was like, really? She was like, yeah, because you're always you're always tapping out these rhythms. You've got this nervous energy, so you need to focus it and fine tune it and push it into something creative.
Well, it sounds like your mom was a pretty big force in your life.
She is, and she's just she's an extremely caring person, empathetic, compassionate. I would say like all of the women in my life, to be honest. In fact, I always feel like I think men have kind of screwed everything up, so I just feel like let women rule the world now. I think it'd be a better place, to be honest.
I don't disagree. Would you look?
Don't get me wrong. There are some evil women out there as well.
There is some evil everybody. Would you have changed anything? Is there anything you look back and you're like, I wish I didn't do this?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's things that I've done that I definitely regret.
Anything you could share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just stupid things, really. You know, like I'm still banned from this radio show on Radio 2 for life, which I'm quite weirdly proud of. But I hadn't slept for 3 days. I was out of my mind on drugs. And I walked in. I don't know how I'd found it, but I somehow found a World War II French helmet, army helmet. I was wearing this helmet. And came in and we performed the songs fine. I was able to perform them, but then I was just, you know, just so rude and disrespectful to the presenter and to the producer and quite aggressive and out there, really. So I was banned. And then just little things like that, or things that I've done, just mainly it's been, you know, drinking, really, in a club and sort of stealing the drink of someone who's really important, and then suddenly I end up not getting on the TV show or things like that. You know? It's just a real sort of wronging and a real layabout, you know.
Is there anything about your actual career trajectory?
Oh yeah, sorry, that was it. Yeah, that was more like my social.
No, that's good to know. It sounds like you think you should, you know, be respectful. That's, I think, a good lesson for anybody. No.
Yeah, it's a difficult one with career. I feel like I'm just sort of winging it, and I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and I'm just kind of, you know, taking each day as it comes. I'm not very good at planning. I'm not a planner. I don't have a business head. I'm pretty terrible with money. I'm kind of, you know, the phrase broke with expensive taste. I'm kind of one of those, you know, but like with my career, a lot of the things have just, I'm not great at networking. I'm not one of those kind of people. I kind of wait until something happens or falls into the lap, you know. I'm not like, I have the drive, but it's mainly just to create music.
Well, I think you hit on something, and, you know, having had the pleasure of working with you, there aren't that many people who I've met where I've thought, this person will make art at any cost. I think that's always really inspired me.
Well, that's really, you know, very kind of you to say that. And I'm not able to be objective, you know, and sort of look at, analyze or dissect the machinations of why and what I do. But, you know, for me, I just can't do anything else. You know, it's my life, you know, it's my lifeblood, really. And it's an obsession and an addiction, and I'll never get bored of it. I never will. I have had moments where I've wanted to give up, but I've tried, but I just can't.
I hear you.
So, you know, it's a absolute, you know, it's always a pleasure to kind of talk about it, and but at the same time, the process itself is otherworldly and quite odd, and you just don't, you know, when inspiration strikes or when you're messing around in your room, in a studio, wherever you might be, there's no way of kind of planning it, because whereas if that's happening if you're on your own, you know, a bolt of lightning, that inspiration that strikes, but whereas when you're co-writing, it's kind of planned because you've been put in a room together to try and write a song. So
for sure. How much of your success do you attribute to luck, and how much do you attribute to hard work, talent, drive, persistence?
Wow. Well, you know, my success per se, I really don't know, because, you know, I feel, and I'm not trying to come across as bitter in any way, because I'm okay with it, but I've made a lot of records and I feel like some of those records should have done better than they did. And I do think a lot of it just comes down to luck. I really do. I really, and you know, being in the right place at the right time. And again, like I said, networking, knowing the right people, and I'm just not very good at it. But I just think, again, you know, it's one of those things that you have to persist. You have to keep going. And, you know, and you always try and remember the reason why you first started doing this. You didn't do it to, you know, to become famous. Or some people, you know, want to be famous. But they want to be, these days, a lot of people want to be famous for not doing anything. You know? Yeah. Maybe pouting like a duck on social media, or, you know, doing a vlog, you know. But for me, it's like, I don't know. I just I don't. It is about luck. I really, you know. But I think true. You know, I think if you just keep going, it will eventually happen.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I think there's not a person I've met in this industry when your name comes up that doesn't have enormous respect for the art that you make. And these are people that are, you know, hit makers, amazing producers, bass players, writers. Everyone's like, oh my God, you collaborated with Ed Harcourt.
Well, I did a bit of research and found out who was going to talk to you, which is why I'm so broke, because I paid them all to say.
Well, appreciate you doing that. It humbled me in the process.
Like I said, you know, I said that I don't plan things, but really, that's a lie. I'm the all-seeing eye.
You are. You are.
You know, look, you just got to watch out, Ben, because you just look so peaceful when you sleep.
Oh my gosh.
And you smell like cotton candy.
All right, I just got one more question for you. What can we expect?
This is getting weird.
I'm out. What can we expect from you in the future? I know you're in a band called, is it Loup Garou? I'm
in a band called Loup Garou, which is French for werewolf, but it was also a song on my album Furnaces, and that's with Cass, who was in Gorillaz, drummer, but he was also in the Census Things and Dakota, and then Rich, who's married to Sophie Ellis-Bextor, but is in Bag of the Feeling. One of my best friends, they're both two of my best friends, and we just got together, and I had a few songs lying around, and so we've done a whole record. It's coming out next year, and it's pretty awesome. It's just like big, billowing, epic rock and roll. And then I've got my next instrumental, Monochrome's Color, coming out in September. And there's a great album that I've co-written and produced for Laura Jansen, who's an incredible half American, half Dutch singer, who was very heavily involved with helping saving refugees on the island of Lesbos.
Wow.
So we made that record last year, and it's just a phenomenal piece of work. I can't wait for people to hear it. I think the first track is being released next month. So yes, it's all lots of different things happening, and just been, you know, writing new songs with Paloma Faith. That's sounding pretty good and quite epic as well. I seem to be writing a lot of epic songs at the moment. So
you've written a few of those before.
I'm thinking big. Yeah, definitely trying to think big. I think maybe it's just having a bigger studio, you know, a bit more space, a bit more space to be over dramatic, you know.
For sure. Well, dude, I'm very excited for our shameless plug for our songs to come out.
I cannot wait for the world to hear our song. I just feel like I love that song so much. So,
me too, man. Well, by the time this podcast is out, people will have heard it. It comes out before this podcast will air. So I'm very stoked. Man, I hope to collaborate in the UK and see you again. It's a pleasure to chat, man. I'm humbled to have you, for real.
It's my pleasure to be on here, Ben. And yeah, it's good to see you again. And thanks for reaching out. And I will see you, I hope, when all of this horrible bullshit has come to an end.
Likewise, my friend. Cheers.
Cheers, man.
You've just listened to an episode of my podcast, People Say. Thanks for tuning in, and look out for more episodes soon.